There comes a time in every person's life when you realise it's not about doing what you are told, but doing what you know is right for you. Let us take a journey of learning and discovery with the world's most successful people who are living the life of their dreams, walking through life using their inner wisdom and being of service to others. Forget exams, grades and test scores. What is your purpose? As we let go of what we think should be and learn from our elders to gain knowledge, inspiration and a true sense of who we are. What are your dreams? Does your life have meaning? Are you living a life of significance? Let's talk with today's guest. Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Taylor as we spend some more time together on the Learning on Fire podcast. Today I'm talking to Jesse Lozano. Thanks for joining me, Jesse, and let's explore the journey of who you are.
Yeah, great. No, I appreciate being here.
Can we start with a little bit of background? And the people will hear from the accent, you're not from the UK, you must be over in America, and a little sort of idea of exactly what it is that you're doing in your current lifestyle.
So I was born in South Africa, lived there for a little while, and then moved over to Texas. My dad is Texan, my mom's Scottish, so I've got a bit of both worlds there. I lived out in the UK from 2000 though, and lived in London for quite a while, which is where I started pitop with my co-founder. But we have offices in Austin, Texas, and in China, and so I'm out here in Austin, Texas, quite a bit these days. So the accent, it's here, there, and everywhere. But the more time I spend in Texas, the more Texan it gets.
Absolutely. And for those people listening who also listen to the other podcasts on the network, I did an interview with Stuart Swan on the National Association for Primary Education podcast, which came out during this week, and he was chatting about pitop from the standpoint of sort of learning creator and that kind of physical learning that's going on. So you said that you're obviously the co-founder. So how did that idea come about, and exactly what was your sort of inspiration for it?
Yeah, so I suppose the inspiration for it was when I met my co-founder Ryan. He was talking about Ryan was has a master's in engineering from Oxford University, and he was over the course of that master's he was interacting with a whole array of different learning materials, and one of the things that he was messing around with was the Raspberry Pi. And in my background, I did politics at university, and then I did law, and then I graduated into the economic recession, and nobody wanted to hire a lawyer. So I ended up learning to build websites, and I sort of went down that path of self-taught full stack developer. I got to talking to Ryan, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm doing this project with the Raspberry Pi, and you can, and I was like, that's really cool. So you can just build anything." And I guess that was, I realized that, wait a second, you can build anything that you want. And wouldn't it be, really cool to be able to learn to not just code, but learn how to build hardware, learn how the digital interacts with the physical, and kind of, wouldn't that be a really interesting way to learn computer science in school? And so we set about trying to think of, well, what's the best way that we can utilize, technology to put physical computing, coding, design thinking into schools so that kids are actually learning to build real things and having fun whilst they're doing it. Because basically when I went to school, computer science for me was just, here's a computer, learn to touch type, and this is a thing called Excel spreadsheets. And if you become an accountant, you might need to use it. So let's learn how to use this specific piece of software. There was this huge gap, and it was in terms of, hey, like, you could actually build anything if you learn computer science at school. If you go to university to do a STEM-based degree, mobile phones, they're not made by aliens. They're made by people like me and you. And, it can be a really interesting and fulfilling, work that you do. And that was kind of, it was like, why isn't computer science awesome, basically? And And that's what really fueled us in the beginning, was just trying to create a new platform that made it, straightforward for teachers and students to build solutions to problems that they had in their local areas, using computer science and technology.
And how did you find that in terms of getting it into schools and like you said, the sort of the way the curriculum is set up in certain areas, certainly in computer science? Is it something that people really loved the idea of but weren't sure how they could fit it in, or were you able to show all those obvious benefits and then they sort of jumped on the chance?
Yeah, so I kind of I'll start off with a joke that I tell everybody. It's like the great thing about computer science is it's the same here as it is in the UK, as it is in China, as it is in India, as it is in Russia. Like it's a universal kind of skill, right? So every curriculum in the world may be slightly different, or actually, in cases, most countries don't have a computer science curriculum. It's still not mandatory. And even in places where it is mandatory, like in the UK, it's really a framework that's mandatory, and teachers can fulfill on that curriculum framework in any way that they see fit. So it's still very much down to the individual teachers, how they're going to actually impart this knowledge on students. So with pitop in the beginning, it was really about, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if you could do all of this maker-based stuff in your classroom, and actually have it feasible. Like, you're not going to spend 30 minutes setting up a classroom to do, an hour's worth of work, to then spend another 30 minutes taking it all down. So the original pitop, the version one's sort of 5 years ago or 4.5 years ago, it was about that ease and convenience of being able to integrate the physical computing side, the maker side of creation into a classroom. And then as we sort of got into a lot of schools and got a lot of feedback from teachers, the real demand there was for a learning framework, something that would enable teachers to better teach computer science skills, but also how those intertwined with other science skills. So now pitop, you can put it into a geography class, use our weather station projects to integrate it into that. You can integrate it into physics, or chemistry, or biology classes, not just computer science. And that's it's just listening to teachers and seeing what kind of framework they actually wanted to work with. And it's an open-ended framework. It's something that it enables teachers to be amazing. It doesn't tell them how to be a teacher, because I think a lot of education technology is trying to become teacher-proof in a way, and really, I think that's the exact opposite of what we should be doing. We should be enabling teachers to be great, and put their kind of individual stamp on learning, and that's where the best learning comes from, is when a teacher can take a framework that's kind of open-ended, but has some great guidelines, and make it something that's truly theirs and special.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense, and I think when I was chatting to Stuart on the other podcast, we were talking about lights and buzzers and creating a structure to put all these things in, and I was just suddenly went off in that direction of yes, and then it's like, well, how do you create the structure, and what materials do you use? And then you learn the same sort of learning format and ideas that we were talking about with pitop into the how you create the structure and all that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden we were talking about a very expansive, very exciting, very student-led way of learning, which is incredibly inspiring for everyone involved. And then we started talking about the idea of testing and all that sort of stuff, and I was sort of joking on there as we started talking about that very briefly. Sort of felt the life being sucked out of me again as I remember all those times. And I thought it's that idea, isn't it, when you can inspire teachers to take it in whatever direction, when you can actually really get the children and the students really involved in what they're doing, you can cover every part of any curriculum you ever needed to do. It just opens up a whole new different world. And what I love about this is a concept and as a product is the fact that you can actually see and understand how it all works, because it's physically there, it's out there in the world, and people can actually visualize exactly what's involved. And I think that's the way the world changes, is because people can see how it works. It's not just about chatting about it, it's actually about physically being able to take part.
I completely agree, and it's about creating those moments in time that enable you to remember the information that you're supposed to remember, right? I mean, look, instruction-based learning, there's a place for that, and it is important. Like, ultimately, you need to, memorize some knowledge and some information, but in your professional life, no one knows everything, and if you ever hire anybody who says that they know everything, well, you're probably in for a rough ride. So it's really about, well, how can you take lots of disparate information and apply it towards a problem to create a solution? And in doing so, you create the best way for students to, ultimately, they all have to do an exam at the end of the year. It's like the necessary evil. But I can tell you now, I'm 31, and out of all of my science classes, I remember the practical ones the best. Like, I know that if you throw potassium into water, you'll know all about it. I know that if you steal some magnesium strip from the chemistry lab and take it to your friends after school and light it on fire, it really lights on fire. And I know what the inside of a frog looks like because we dissected one in class. Those are permanent memories that are embedded in there because I have that experiential moment in time where I went and did something with the knowledge that was presented. Maths is a massively useful subject. Do I remember most of the stuff that I was taught? No, but if I went online and researched a little bit, you'd get it back and all that. But it's really about providing those touch points for students to anchor everything it is that they're supposed to memorize on. And when they come into an exam and they have to, with a pen and paper, write code, then, which is a ridiculous thing in and of itself, but they can rely on the examples that they built and contributed to themselves, rather than having to sort of do a memory recall exercise where they're just, what's a for loop? Okay, I remember this. It was in this page of a textbook, and here's the definition, and here's an example. It's flipped the other way when you do experiential learning. It's, okay, I know what a for loop is because I built this thing, and therefore this is the definition of a for loop.
Yeah, and I suspect as we start to progress through the podcast, a lot of these themes will come up with the answers to some of your questions. So why don't we why don't we swing back round now, and I'm interested to see how this question goes, bearing in mind all the places you've lived and your experiences. But what does your life look like now, and how would you say it's different from when you were growing up?
So it's a question that I've thought about. I've been working a lot. I've always worked a lot, but now, I suppose what's different about life now is that the stage at which I'm working on is a lot bigger, and it's genuinely very, very fun to get up in the morning and work on a massive problem. Like, what problem is pitop trying to solve? Was how do you teach millions of kids the skills that they need to thrive in a changing world? Right? So it's not just computer science; it's all those future skills that we're going to need. And as we go forward and more machines take jobs that we kind of traditionally did as humans, how do we solve that problem? So it's really fun to be able to work on that. I travel a lot for work, and that used to be more fun than it is now. Sort of 4 years of consistent, almost weekly travel. It takes a toll. But it's actually sort of opened my eyes to the world in a way that they weren't before, which is great. And yeah, basically my life right now, it's completely surrounded by technology. I 100% like to bring on as much new technology as possible, although sort of staying away from just like social media stuff, because I don't particularly like that. But any new techno, I'm pretty obsessed with the new Microsoft HoloLens and and all that side of stuff. My life before, well, it was I guess I've always worked a lot. I always liked studying, and I always liked applying myself to things. So when I was a kid, I played a lot of baseball in Texas. Went to the Little League World Series in Cooperstown, New York. I played for the UK a little while, and then I was a black belt in karate for a while. So I did loads and loads of sports when I was young, and I'm kind of paying for that now that I'm older. I feel it. But I suppose technology was not actually, when I was young, it wasn't a part of my life at all, really. I still remember getting the internet at my house in Texas, and like going on to AOL, and like the first game I ever played online was a Jetsons like game that was kind of like Angry Birds basically, but you were a Jetsons character. And so that I suppose it's really been me learning what I wanted to do in life, and now I'm finally getting to do that. I had to do a lot of university years where I was doing subjects that were interesting, but definitely not what I wanted to do in real life, to get to this point where I kind of happily lucked into being involved in technology and education.
And it certainly sounds like a lot of it, and I can certainly remember the same thing. When you're younger, you don't actually know where you're heading necessarily. It's only just a kind of, I like doing this, I like doing that. And like you say, whether it's studying certain things or whether it's doing sports or just being interested in something, that's all you can do now. And actually not worrying too much about the bigger picture, but just sort of following your gut in terms of what you do and don't like. And putting your efforts into things which then you can really strive for as you go through. And like you say, bit by bit, as you do get older, the reality for everyone is that you have a bit more control because you don't have to go to school. You can choose to study, but then you suddenly realise that what you have gained in that early years is that kind of, but I did enjoy this and I do enjoy this now, and that relationship stays the same. And I think that's probably quite an important one for you to sort of understand, is that, as you were just saying, your life is completely different than it was, but in essence, your sort of understanding of what you enjoyed was the thing that sort of led you through.
Well, completely. And one of the lasting, I've always been involved in team endeavors, like whether it's doing 10 tours like Duke of Edinburgh stuff or playing baseball or cricket or rugby. I've always done team-based stuff, and that it's great. It's one of the best sort of things that you can do when you're young, because collaboration and working together to create something better than what you could do by yourself is one of the most important skills in life. And that, it's one of the reasons why pitop, we focus so much on collaboration. I always make the joke, it's like, when's the last time you ever had to do something in isolation by yourself with no help from the internet for 3 hours? Right. But guess what? That's how they're going to grade how much you know.
Yeah, for sure.
In university. So the extracurricular, that team building side of things, whether it's like, doing hackathons in a team or whether it's doing something sporting, it all builds to something very important, which is, well, how do you work with other people to solve a problem?
Yeah, I think that's great for us all to hear, that how all those things actually sort of fit together. So having said all that about the school setup and everything, what was valuable about your school experience?
So I had a few different school experiences. When I was in Texas, I went to a really small school. There was 150 kids in the whole school. And in my year, there was I think there's 12 or 13 kids in my year. So it was very different type of school. And then when I was 13, happily, I managed to get a scholarship to go to a fantastic school in the UK called Millfield School in Somerset. And just an amazing school, fantastic sports, but also amazing academic facilities. It was just a great experience for me going there. And I grew up a lot going to that school, because Millfield, they have over 1,000 students from and kids from 52 different, well, must be more now, but over 50 countries go to this one school. So it's just this amazing melting pot of different cultures, different people, different ideas. And the teachers there were fantastic, even though some subjects were better than others. But I guess going to that kind of school, I got a really good understanding of how to perform well on exams. And that is one thing that I think all top schools, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, you learn how to perform well on exams. And it's not the same as actually knowing things. It's just you learn a skill, which is how do I write a good essay so that I get an A on this exam, rather than how do I become a master at this subject. Some subjects, though, at school were just should have been really boring, and they weren't because the teacher was so great. And so I get my takeaway from education in general was that it's not the end of the world if you don't perform well at school. I mean, actually, if you genuinely choose subjects that you're interested in, probably have a better time of it. Like you said earlier, when you're a kid, you don't necessarily know what you want to do. Well, when I was a kid, I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know. I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. And I signed a contract with my parents when I was 12. I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what I'm going to do. And from 12, I shaped my entire school career to be a lawyer, which is crazy, really, if you think about a 12-year-old deciding that. But that's what I did. And then I ended up really hating law, and I thought it was it just wasn't the thing for me to do, even though I went to university to do it. So I should have done DT and things like that, but it wasn't. I just, even though I really liked those subjects and I could have spent hours and hours, I could have spent 24 hours a day doing like fine art and DT type stuff, but I didn't think that you could make a career out of that.
No, and that's the great thing that that I hope that people start to understand as through all of these podcasts is the fact that, one, you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up, and also that even having done what you said, you signed a contract with your parents and you went to university to study all these things, you still now find yourself only at the age of 31 doing what you love in a way that you do it in that creative environment. So nothing is forever. You can make those changes as and when you feel like you've got the ability to do it, I guess.
Yeah, completely. And it's not just making those changes when you're young. Like people make those changes. I mean, look at Jack Ma. People make, or like what's it? Who is the McDonald's founder, or the controversial one, Roy Kroc, I think. These people change directions, and you can change direction at any stage of life. There's always going to be an on ramp to becoming successful, but really, yeah, what is success? I would argue that it's actually being able to do what you want to do every day is more important than sort of consumer-based ideas of success.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you talked about some of your subjects sort of being more fun than you thought they ought to have been or whatever. And so which teachers do you remember? And I guess you'll remember them because of exactly that, sort of making them fun within a subject you weren't even sure you wanted to be having fun with.
Yeah. So in typical school fashion, I don't know the first names of my teachers. They're all sir or miss. But so economics, Mr. Snedden. I've mentioned him actually a lot. I don't know if he's ever heard anything or seen or read an interview from me. There's no real reason why he would, but he made economics amazingly interesting. He had worked in the city for a while and then became a teacher at Millfield School, and it just made things interesting in a way that they just, any other teacher could have just gone through the motions and explained to you what economies of scale is, or opportunity loss is, but the way that he was able to link those the things that you needed to answer on the exam to real world examples that he'd actually gone through. It was really interesting. He was also perhaps somewhat unintentionally very, very funny, and to the point. So great teacher, and made it really fun to learn economics. And then another one, Mr. Rolfe, and politics. And he was just an extremely charismatic teacher. Everybody liked him. There wasn't a student that didn't think he was fun and interesting. And also he had a great subject to teach. He taught history and politics, but I did politics with him. And yeah, again, it was really fun because you were able to link what you were learning in the classroom with stuff that was happening right now. So it felt extremely relevant. And he was really, really good at doing that.
I think sometimes we sort of underestimate the whole personality side, don't you? There are some people in life that you just get on with and you connect with in a way that you can't really understand or put your finger on. And like I say, it might be the being funny about it. It might just be the fact that you appreciate their integrity, or it might be the fact, like you say, if they've got an experience, a world experience, which they can then bring into the classroom as well. I think it becomes a real kind of I don't know, there's kind of a knowledge base there, obviously, which you can't get just by being an academic and whatever you're studying. I think that's come up a few times before, and I can really understand why they make such an impact on everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a big part of it is being genuine. As funny as it sounds, that teachers who are genuine with their students can connect with their students in a way that a teacher who wants to just be a teacher, I guess. It's difficult, but I feel what I'm trying to say here is that when you are genuine with your students, you make connections in ways that encourage students to learn the subject because they feel like they're being taught as maybe not necessarily as a peer, but as a better standing than just someone who's being given information and told to memorize it. You know what I mean?
I think that's absolutely true, because I mean, at the end of the day, we all want people to be interested in us, and we're our most important person, and so if there's someone who's actually we feel is truly talking to us in a way that's important for us to learn or for us to understand what's going on, I think that connection is I think that's the sort of thing you're talking about there, in terms of it's not just about I'm learning these facts, it's about that you're actually teaching me. And I guess maybe that's the difference between real teaching and just being a student-teacher kind of relationship.
Yeah.
So, who did you admire when you were young, and what was it about that person that had such an impact?
Yeah, it's a good question. There were a few people, but if I had to boil it down into one person, it'd be Pete Rose. So baseball players will know who I'm talking about. Pete Rose, nicknamed Mr. Hustle, was a really prolific baseball player, known for running everywhere on the pitch. So hence the nickname, like Mr. Hustle. He would run everywhere, do everything to 110% effort. So when I was playing a lot of baseball when I was a kid, that was the person that I wanted to emulate. And so when I was on the pitch, I would run everywhere. I would always be listening, and I would always do everything the coach told me to do, at 110% effort, and it did me really well. It's funny to think that it's not necessarily, when you're going out to do something, if you decide to put all of your effort into it, and you actually do put all of your effort into it all the time, then you get a much better result than if you're just there to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. We were at the dinner table with my kids and that yesterday, and we were talking about schools and exams and what you need to do, and the added work that's often put on children these days when they're studying for exams and all that kind of thing. And it's something that I remember from reading The Slight Edge is that sense that if you just turn up regularly, you put 100% in, and you just focus on doing what you're supposed to do, or what you perceive you need to do by the mentors or the people around you that are supporting you as you're learning, actually you get a long way into just achieving everything that you need to, because the majority of people, either they don't do it at all, or they certainly don't put 100% in, or they don't just commit to what's around them. And that can make the difference between success and failure in lots of ways. And there's no magic pill even. We can talk about talent and all those sorts of things, but actually just showing up at 100%, doing what you know is around you, actually is a massive part of that.
Yeah, I think you're very, very, very correct there. It's when you think about the world, because it's hard to imagine how many people there are in the world, right? It's actually hard to visualize. So, in the US or the UK, you're like, okay, well, I know that I'm one of millions in this country. And then when you boil it down into, let's say, what do you want to be? A lawyer or a doctor, or maybe you want to be an entrepreneur, or you want to be a developer. Well, there's inherently going to be millions, at least hundreds of thousands of people who also want to do what you want to do. And so the base level at which you have to perform in order to actually achieve what you want to achieve is to try 100% of the time when you're actually trying to achieve a goal. Because if you're not trying your hardest, well, then how can you expect to outperform the hundreds of thousands of people who also want to do what you do, or also want to do what you're doing, and they are trying 100% of the time? So yeah, it's a really important lesson, I think, that a lot of young people could learn, is that it's not just going to, like, trying really hard is just that's the standard that you have to do. And then there's things like luck and networking and sort of the random number generator stuff that happens in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And often people say they make their own luck, but like you say, there's within that, there's the understanding that bigger picture. And I love the fact you just mentioned there about networking and just, how you show up in the world, how you talk to people, just even knowing that you should talk to somebody or whatever that happens to be. There are lots of those skills which aren't actually taught in school necessarily, and actually they are probably the most important things when it comes to actually being not being even a grown-up, being anybody that wants to interact with people and actually thrive in a society of like-minded people.
Yeah, exactly. The more people you talk to, the more likely you are to find people that are interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the best piece of advice you've ever been given, and who gave it to you?
Yeah, so I think the advice is twofold. The first being it's sort of a statement rather than advice, and it was, "What have you done lately?" And that's a piece of advice that I got from my dad. And it's because when you're trying to do great things and when you're trying to do anything or achieve something or solve a problem, there's a temptation to, get a little bit of success or feel a little bit of accomplishment, and then you sort of lay back on that accomplishment and you feel good about it. And you're like, yeah. But then the world keeps going and it really starts to become a case of, well, that's great that you did that, but what have you done lately? And so really, I guess the advice cascades into the next piece, which is that you don't deserve, like, no one deserves anything, and you have to go out there and win it. And that was a piece of advice I got actually from our chairman, Eric Wilkinson at Pitop, because when you're trying really hard, right, and you think that you've done great stuff lately, it can become frustrating when you feel like, you want the company to be bigger, or you want something in your personal life to happen, or you want to get something done, and you become frustrated because it hasn't, you haven't done what you wanted to do, or something hasn't happened the way that you want it to happen. And then you have to realize that actually there's no such thing as deserving anything actually. When you get it, then by virtue of you having it, you've now deserved it, right? But you can't get frustrated at the fact that you don't have it. You should just keep working to go and get it. And that's the best advice that I've gotten, and working the way that I have done, it's helped a lot to consistently put in effort all the time, because then you kind of become okay with the fact that it's a long process. Trying to achieve something really big is a very long process, and it's not just going to happen overnight.
And I think actually understanding that whole journey part of it's important, isn't it? And it's also breaking it down into bits, because along that journey and whatever it is that you're trying to create or succeed or learn, there are wins. It's that the first time this happened or that happened or we've achieved this, and I guess that's where the kind of what have you done lately? Well, that's great, and you can rest on your laurels there for a little bit. But if you want it to then be the same but bigger or better in the future, then it's putting that continual effort in, and I can really understand how that works.
Yeah, and just not having an appreciation of time as well. I remember I used to think in the early days of pitop. I mean, I've grown a lot over the last 5 years in terms of my thinking, but in the early days of pitop, we used a team communication tool called Slack, and it's great, and I love it. But because you can talk to anyone on your team at any time, share files and all that kind of stuff. But I used to say to everybody who was on the pitop team, I'm like, you have to be available on Slack at all times, like all the time, not just in work hours, like all the time. And if I message you on Slack and you don't message me back in 3 minutes, then I'm going to be upset because I've got work to do. And if I message you, it means I need you to answer. And which, you have to be a little crazy at the start of things when you're literally, printing laptops in your living room and trying to do stuff with no money and all that. Time I'm not like that anymore, thankfully, and I think thankfully for everybody on the team as well. But it's that time expectation. Things always take much longer than you expect them to, and success in general in anything you're trying to do tends to take much longer than you had expected.
Absolutely. Enjoying the rest of it around it is key in that scenario, isn't it? Like you say. Yeah.
Like you said, the journey is a very important part of it. There's that. I mean, it's like super stereotypical advice. It's not the end. Like the end isn't the reward. It's the journey that is the reward. Like that's the. So you have to do something that you want to be doing, because if, let's say, you work for 10 years to do something, and then you get to the end of the 10 years and you're like, this. Where's my reward now? Well, no, it's all the things that you did in the 10 years leading up to, the kind of plateau of whatever you were doing. That was actually the reward. And if you weren't doing something that you didn't want to do for 10 years in a row, then I've got some bad news for you.
Absolutely. It's a really sort of potent point, really, because my day job is a professional musician, and so having been to music college and studied in London, that sort of 10,000 hour rule of just those days of getting up and practicing and all that kind of thing. The one fantastic concert at the Royal Albert Hall is brilliant, but those 10,000 hours and the practice and the rehearsals and the driving around and all of that sort of stuff, if you don't love the entire process of that, it's a very long time to wait to get that adrenaline rush in a world famous concert hall.
Yeah, and time makes everything seem fun. You know what I mean? All those terrible times, like I bet for you, I bet it's the same as it was for me. And that obviously you remember some of the really cool stuff that happened, like when some amazing moment happened, and you're like, yeah, that's great. But actually, the things that I look back on, like kind of, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was cool. It's like the horrible bits that were they were bad at the time. Like kind of like sleeping on a bad bed, and you're not eating properly, and you're kind of working all the time, and you're like, oh God, it'll all be better. It'll all be better eventually. Like it'll be fine. Those are the times that I find myself like when I meet up with Ryan again, or I chat to people about pitop in the early days, I'm like, yeah, well, like that was terrible, right? But it's those were the most fun bits now that I look back on it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that. And we're talking about sort of journey and all that sort of stuff. What does your future look like?
Yeah, well, that's a $1 million question, isn't it? But I guess so. I have a pretty good outlook as to what I'm going to be doing for the next 2 to 3 years. But the future for me is continuing to grow pitop. It's we started out as two guys in a living room, and now we're over more than 80 people in 3 offices across the world, and with hundreds of thousands of students that work on the pitop platform. So that it's really about how can we get that at a much bigger scale, and how. So for me, it's a sort of personal journey of learning more skills on the business of building a business, and hopefully bringing on more great people into the team. I've been very lucky to be able to work with people like Graham Brown Martin or Dr. Bill Rankin or Joe Kelly or Duncan Kent. Paul Callahan. I could name literally anybody in pitop, and it's like I'm extremely lucky to be able to work with them. So one of the big parts of my future is being able to work with these great people and have them. It's pitop is way more than anything me and Ryan built in the beginning. So it's working with people like that to make it much better than it ever has been or is now. So that's the future for me, is just consistent participation in this thing that we call pitop.
I love it, and I love that whole collaboration thing and the working with people, and sort of a slight tangent to that is the fact that I've worked in many organisations where just getting things off the ground are incredibly hard, and people sacrifice so much, and they put their sort of their blood and sweat into getting it going. But the one thing that's always held them back as they've sort of gone out of that stage and wanted to sort of progress is the fact they've always wanted to keep their hands so tightly around everything that's going on that they've not brought in the people that can help it grow, or they've brought people in, but they've sort of handcuffed them to doing exactly what they wanted without sort of allowing that collaboration to grow and expand. Because like I say, if you're working with great people, they are the sum of what you could achieve, and I just love the way you were talking about it and what you're wanting to do. It's a very sort of expansive vision, and I think from there it can only be a positive one.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually one of the lessons I learned like early on. It was I still remember it. Like I won't name the exact example that taught me this lesson, but so in the beginning, it was me and Ryan. Ryan did hardware stuff. I did everything else. So, and in my mind, like Ryan did the really hard stuff and I did all the easy stuff, but actually it was just, and Ryan in his mind thought that he did all the easy stuff and I did all the hard stuff. It was just, well, I don't know how to do what you can do and you don't know how to do what I can do. So this is how we're divided in terms of the workload. And I think both of us thought what the other person was doing was insane and amazing. I certainly did. And so in the beginning, people talk about wearing a lot of different hats, and I wore so many different hats because I built I built the website, I built the pitop branding, I built the way that we would sell things. I was the salesperson too. I was the SEO guy. I was the software guy to some extent on the platform. So I did so many different things, and then it was like, okay, well, we got it to this stage, and then we launched on Indiegogo and got enough money to hire people, and it was kind of like, all right, I told Ryan, I was like, we're going to use all this money that we've gotten to hire people, and then I'm going to go raise more money so that we can make the first batch of laptops in time. But if we don't hire people, then there's just no way that we're going to be able to make the first batch of pitops in any type of reasonable timeline. And so when I first brought new team members on, it's hard to let go of things that you've been doing and doing well. You can, especially when you're a small company, like really small, a couple people, the reality of having so many different hats on is really that actually it's still doable by one person. But if you want to get to like now, it would be impossible to do all those things. It's like marketing in and of itself or sales in and of itself could not be done by a single person, much less trying to do marketing and sales, right? And when I was going through this sort of personal journey of bringing people onto an idea that, really the first idea that I'd had that had wide success, widespread traction, I suppose you could call it, was letting go of those hats and letting other people do stuff. And definitely in the beginning, did the people that we brought on to do specific, like marketing or some sales, did they do it as good as I was doing it in the beginning? No. And I really remember seeing something and I was like, like I could have done that better. But at the same time, I was like, there's just not enough time in the day to do all of this stuff, and they'll get better. Like this is, and I had to remember, remember what you were like when you first tried this. And so of course they're not going to be as good as you are when you've been doing something for like a whole year. But really quickly, like it just took like a matter of a month or two, those people will get up to speed, and then they won't just be as good as you were at it. They'll be better than you were at it, because that's all they're doing that one task all the time, and they really care about that. And then, you go to where we are now, and I'm like, man, I'm so lucky to be with these people, because they're doing things that I could never do, or they think of things that I never would have thought of. And actually it frees me up to do, what I'm sort of uniquely good at, which is the business of building pitop, the business. And that you have to trust other people, and you have to, otherwise you're never going to get bigger than like two guys in a living room.
Absolutely. And I love the correlation, really. It's a little bit like when we were talking about the teacher. It's that sense of, yes, they're talking to me. And like you said, if you can take those skills on board and you're talking to the people that you're training, or you're imparting your knowledge and allowing them to fly, it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? But it's just that the roles have been flipped, really. Yeah.
And it's a trust. It's a trust and an understanding that, you might not, no one's going to be perfect, especially in the beginning. And, you learn through doing. So everyone is going to get better as long as you let them try something. And I guess that's one of the core things that we try and instill in schools. It's, how do you learn? You learn best through doing things. So you have to have things in the classroom that allow students to try doing things.
Just to finish off then, what podcast, book, video, film, song, or any resource has had the biggest impact on your life so far, and why was that?
I mean, this is a really good question. I want to preface it first by when YouTube first came around, I can't remember where I got this idea, but ages ago when I was 15, I decided that I was going to watch a documentary every day for my whole life, and I've done that. It's gotten way easier with the proliferation of content on YouTube, and like PBS has just an unbelievable amount of sort of 6 to 10 minute documentaries that you can just consume on a massive scale. You can binge watch like the entirety of what's happened in the world, basically. So I've watched a lot of documentaries, and I've read a lot of, I've done at least one thing every day for basically 16 years in a row, which is a lot. But the one that I enjoyed the most, that still sticks to me today, is actually the biography of Cornelius Vanderbilt. And basically, he was at one point the wealthiest American. I think probably one of the wealthiest people to ever live. He owned one of every $12 in the United States. And so when people talk about how wealthy Jeff Bezos is and stuff nowadays, it's like, yeah, like Um, if you really want to look at somebody who was so successful that they basically almost owned 10% of American wealth, well, this guy Cornelius Vanderbilt, where did he come from? He was like the son of basically normal people in New York, like poor people, and he started off his life his business life when he was 15, ferrying people on a little sailboat across, to Manhattan, and that he got enough money to start. He built this massive steamboat empire, which is pretty cool because people don't realize, but basically they just used to race each other in steamboats to see who could get to places quick enough. And there's this whole scandal about how steamboats were blowing up because like steamboat captains were like just pushing these things to the nth degree. And anyway, he ended up sort of winning that race, as it were, over a number of years. And then all of a sudden, trains became the big thing. So steamboats were basically rendered obsolete by trains, right? So then he created the biggest railroad empire and built Grand Central Station in New York. And basically, he was just this amazing individual who, even back, I think he lived to like 86 years old, and he crashed a train because he was racing it. He used to race horses, carriage racing. And I think he was like 82 or something like that. He was still racing horses and crashed and basically broke all the bones in his body. But he sort of walked it off. So I don't know, I highly recommend the book. The Vanderbilts to this day are still a really big family, and it's just the enduring sort of impact that he's had on the world that I find really, it's just something you only see in like one person in a generation type thing, especially back then. I just thought it's a great book, a great story, and a really interesting part of history.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we'll have links on the show notes to all these things. So if you go to educationonfire.com and in the search bar, just put Jesse, it'll pop up and we'll have links to all those things there. So it's been fascinating. I've really enjoyed chatting to you.
It's been fun.
What's the best way for people to find out more about you?
If you want to find out more about me, Pitop is the only thing I've ever done. So go to pitop.com. It's just pi-top.com. You can read about all the stuff that we do there. I highly, highly, highly recommend our blog. Andrew is an amazing content creator around the stories and the blog articles that we write. And I've found myself sort of going, all right, great, a new Pitop blog is out. I get to read it. So I highly recommend that if you want to sort of know what we're up to and what we're thinking in a wider sense.
That's fantastic. You can't get any better recommendation than someone who created a company being excited about what they're going to learn from what's going on from their blog. I mean, that's just fantastic. And I'm definitely going to be checking it out as soon as we finish up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jesse, for sharing your wisdom and allowing us to learn from your experiences.
Well, I really appreciate it. I had a great time chatting. And I will. I look forward to putting up the podcast on our Slack and being like, hey guys,
fantastic.
Listen to this.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you so much, Jesse.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Learning on Fire podcast. For more information, please visit educationonfire.com and follow the links from the homepage. This show is sponsored by the National Association for Primary Education. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.